Allied shells rained down on Gallipoli at 4:17 a.m. on April 25, 1915, and the mobile howitzers that would have slaughtered thousands on the beaches below explode in their emplacements. For months, Winston Churchill had staked his political career on this gamble, a strike through the soft underbelly of the Central Powers that would knock the Ottoman Empire from the war and open a lifeline to Russia. The naval assault of March 18 had ended in catastrophe when 3 battleships struck mines in Erinco Bay, but the lessons of that failure now inform a different approach. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. The Anzac forces scramble ashore against sporadic rifle fire rather than the withering artillery barrage that defined our timeline's bloodbath. By noon, Australian troops reach the ridgeline at Chunuk Bair. By nightfall, they dig in along the Surrey Bair Heights, the very ground that Mustafa Kemal's 19th Division would have held with such legendary tenacity. But Kemal's counterattack, launched without the covering fire of the destroyed howitzers, falters against entrenched machine guns. The heights belong to the Allies. General Ian Hamilton, watching from the deck of HMS Queen Elizabeth, permits himself a rare moment of optimism. But what no one understands yet, what will only become clear in the desperate weeks ahead, is that taking these hills has set in motion consequences that will reshape continents. The minesweepers enter the Dardanelles on May 3rd under conditions their crews could scarcely have imagined weeks earlier. Allied artillery on the captured heights systematically dismantles the Ottoman shore batteries that had made previous sweeping operations suicidal. The deadly minefield at Erinco Bay, which had claimed HMS Irresistible, HMS Ocean, and the French Bouvet, is cleared over 11 days of methodical work. Otto Lehmann von Sanders, the German general commanding the Ottoman Fifth Army, recognizes the strategic situation with brutal clarity. Without control of the heights, the straits cannot be held. He orders a fighting withdrawal toward the Boulet lines, hoping to contest the peninsula's neck, but his forces are already hemorrhaging deserters. Ottoman morale, fragile after years of Balkan defeats, cracks under the weight of Allied naval supremacy. On June 23, 1915, the first supply convoy, 12 merchantmen escorted by 4 cruisers, enters the Sea of Marmara. The naval personnel who pass through that narrow waterway understand they are making history. Russia's warm water lifeline, blocked since the war's outbreak, is open. The minarets of Constantinople are visible from the deck of HMS Agamemnon when she drops anchor on July 8th. The psychological effect on the Ottoman capital proves more devastating than any bombardment. Bread riots erupt in Fatih and Üsküdar within days. The Sultan's government, already a puppet of the Young Turk triumvirate, loses what little authority remains as civil order collapses. Enver Pasha, the ambitious minister of war who had championed alliance with Germany, watches his dreams of pan-Turkic empire dissolve. The disaster at Sarikamish the previous winter had already cost him 80,000 men in the Caucasus snows. Now British dreadnoughts sit within shelling range of his capital. Talat Pasha and Shemal Pasha, his partners in the ruling triumvirate, begin making quiet inquiries through neutral channels. The government evacuates to Ankara on July 19th, but this merely confirms what everyone already knows. The empire that had endured for 6 centuries is dying. Enver Pasha boards a German submarine on the night of August 2nd, slipping away to Berlin rather than face the consequences of his catastrophic policies. The provisional government that emerges in his absence, a coalition of moderate young Turks and surviving members of the old constitutional movement, has no cards left to play. The armistice negotiations at Mudros conclude on August 29, 1915. Ottoman delegates sign away control of the straits to an Allied commission, surrender their remaining naval vessels, and accept the demobilization of forces in Syria and Mesopotamia. The terms are harsh, but not unexpected. What surprises observers is how quickly the empire's military apparatus simply stops functioning. Entire divisions melt away as soldiers walk home to their villages. The war's Eastern question, which had preoccupied European diplomacy for a century, appears resolved. But the question of what replaces the Ottoman structure, that question is only beginning. The first Allied convoy reaches Odessa on September 14, 1915, carrying artillery shells that Russian batteries have desperately needed since the Great Retreat of summer. Over the following months, more than 4 million tons of war material flow through the Dardanelles, rifles from Britain, locomotives from America, and above all the ammunition that Russian factories cannot produce in sufficient quantity. Tsar Nicholas II, who has assumed personal command of the army with predictable results, suddenly finds his forces capable of offensive operations. The Brusilov offensive, when it comes in 1916, is not the isolated Russian success of our timeline, but part of a coordinated Allied push supported by adequate artillery. The Austro-Hungarian lines in Galicia collapse. By autumn, Russian forces threaten the Carpathian passes. The domestic situation, however, remains volatile. Food prices rise. Industrial strikes multiply. But the crucial difference is victory. Soldiers who are advancing forgive much that soldiers dying in retreat cannot. The Ottoman collapse has come too quickly. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, still being negotiated when Constantinople fell, remains unsigned. Sir Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot have sketched their lines on maps, but the political reality has outpaced their diplomacy. Britain's conflicting promises now collide in the open. Hussein bin Ali, Sharif of Mecca, has been assured Arab independence in exchange for rebellion against the Turks. But the rebellion has barely begun when there are no Turks left to rebel against. Greek Prime Minister Venizelos, finally overcoming King Constantine's resistance, demands Smyrna and the Aegean coast as Greece's reward for belated entry. Armenian delegations arrive in Paris with maps of their own, claiming lands where their people have lived for millennia. The peace conference that convenes in late 1915 resembles less a negotiation than an auction, and the highest bidders are not always those with the strongest claims. February 1917 arrives, and with it the strikes and bread riots that threaten Petrograd. But the soldiers ordered to suppress the demonstrations have just returned from victorious campaigns. They are not the demoralized, mutinous conscripts of our timeline. When the order comes to fire, they fire. The February uprising is crushed in 5 days of bloody street fighting. Nicholas II, shaken, agrees to a constitution that strips him of meaningful power while preserving the throne. The Duma assumes real authority. Alexander Kerensky, who would have led a provisional government, instead becomes a cabinet minister in a constitutional monarchy. Lenin remains in Swiss exile, his moment past. Russia fights on, exhausted but unbroken. The Romanov dynasty survives, diminished, constitutionalized, but intact. History's most consequential revolution never happens. The armistice comes in spring, 1917, 18 months before our timeline's conclusion. Germany, facing a two-front war without the advantage of Russian collapse, accepts terms that are punitive but not annihilating. The Rhineland is demilitarized. Alsace-Lorraine returns to France. Reparations are demanded but calibrated to what Germany can actually pay. Russia sits at the peace table as a victor, diminished by reform but not by revolution. The Middle East is partitioned according to arrangements negotiated in haste during 1915, arrangements that satisfy no one but prevent no one's participation. There is no Balfour Declaration, no British mandate for Palestine, no French mandate for Syria in the forms we would recognize. The map that emerges looks nothing like the straight lines and arbitrary borders of our Sykes-Picot inheritance. Winston Churchill's gamble has paid off beyond his most optimistic projections, but the world that results from this different war is not necessarily better, merely different. The Russian Empire's survival means the suppression of movements that, in our timeline, would inspire anti-colonial struggles worldwide. The chaotic Ottoman partition prevents certain atrocities while enabling others. And somewhere in a Munich beer hall, a failed Austrian painter nurses grudges that this timeline's more moderate peace does nothing to extinguish. History turns on moments. A coordinated bombardment. A ridge taken before sunset. The consequences ripple outward, and the world we know dissolves into the world that might have been.